Hello, and welcome to the Haaretz podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer in Tel Aviv. Major campaign is underway by international news organizations who are pushing the Israeli government and the Israeli military to allow reporters to enter Gaza. All journalists have been forbidden from independent reporting on the conflict there since October 7th, 2023. The foreign journalists have been fighting for their access since the beginning of the war, including a petition to Israel's Supreme Court to allow them to enter with no success. The issue has taken on a new urgency recently as the humanitarian situation in Gaza worsens and hunger takes its toll on all civilians there, including the Palestinians who work for these news organizations. Israel's Foreign Press Association released a statement last week calling on Israel to, quote, take immediate steps to ensure the continuous flow of food into Gaza, and after countless delays, to open the border to allow journalists to enter the territory independently to report on this devastating conflict. That fight has been joined by a long list of global news organizations and advocacy groups. Joining me on the podcast today to discuss the issue is Jeremy Diamond, CNN's correspondent in Jerusalem. Jeremy has been covering the war since the beginning. Before coming to Israel in 2023, Jeremy was a CNN White House correspondent covering both the Biden and Trump administrations. He's been covering Donald Trump since the beginning of his first campaign for president. In our conversation, Jeremy speaks about the battle to get into Gaza, the challenges of covering this conflict, and the similarities and differences between covering Trump and Netanyahu. Our conversation is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Jeremy Diamond, CNN Jerusalem correspondent. Welcome to the Haaretz podcast.
Hey, Allison. Thanks for having me.
Jeremy, can you tell us about the battle for the ability for foreign press in Israel to enter the Gaza Strip? It's both a public battle and a legal battle. So you can just summarize for us when it started and where it stands now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to note here, I think, is that this is unprecedented. Never before in Israel's history has the Israeli government blocked access to Gaza for this amount of time. And we frankly reached that milestone months and months ago. We have been calling on the Israeli government to allow us into Gaza to be able to do our jobs basically since the beginning of the war. We filed our first legal petition with the Israeli Supreme Court back in December of 2023. And now, we are 21 months into this war. Our case before the Supreme Court, the state has been granted one extension after the next. Once we were granted a hearing date, we then saw that date postponed repeatedly. And now we're in a position where, despite filing an urgent appeal to the Supreme Court earlier this month, we are now waiting until October 2023 for our hearing. And really, it's just a position that we shouldn't be in right now. After 21 months of war, it is essential that the Israeli government allow foreign journalists into Gaza to be able to do our jobs, to be able to cover what is happening there. And frankly, it's an imperative not just for Israel's critics, not just for those who want us to cover the suffering that is happening in Gaza and all that has been wrought by the Israeli military in the Gaza Strip. But it should also be an imperative for Israel's supporters. We've heard the Israeli government repeatedly cast doubt on reports by Palestinian journalists on the ground. Recently, we've heard them accusing Hamas of stockpiling aid and accusing them of being partly responsible for the starvation crisis that we are seeing in Gaza. If they're going to make those accusations, then they should let us in to do independent journalism there and to be able to report a full and clear picture of everything that is happening inside of Gaza.
How do you face the challenge of trying to report fairly on what's going on inside of Gaza when you have no access to it? How have you been managing till now?
Look, it is challenging. It is challenging, but it also doesn't mean that we don't know what's happening in Gaza. And we can hold both of those ideas, I think, at the same time. And that is to say that, our Palestinian colleagues who are reporting in the Gaza Strip, including several freelance journalists who have been working with CNN throughout the entirety of this war, they are doing heroic work under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And frankly, the primary motivation for our call to access is not because we don't think that the journalists who are there are doing a good job and are not presenting a fair and accurate picture of what's happening. It's because they can't continue to do this on their own, and they shouldn't have to shoulder that burden on their own. Over the course of the last week, we have watched as every single person in Gaza has been impacted by the starvation of this man-made crisis that is currently happening inside the Gaza Strip. And that includes our fellow journalists inside of Gaza who have been surviving sometimes by simply stirring salt into water to be able to give them some energy, to be able to continue to go on and do their jobs. Many of them have been displaced multiple times inside of Gaza. And frankly, these are just conditions that are not sustainable. And that's part of my motivation for pushing for us to get in, because they shouldn't have to do that job on their own. Now, beyond that, there are, of course, also challenges to not being on the ground. Our fundamental task as journalists is to report what we see and what we hear. Our job is to be on the ground, even when it is dangerous, perhaps especially when it is dangerous. We were in the kibbutzim on October 7th and in the days and weeks after October 7th, reporting what we could see and what we could hear, hearing the stories of tragedy of Hamas's horrendous attack on October 7th, speaking with the families of victims, speaking with the families of hostages, since then speaking with released hostages. All of that was possible because we are on the ground, and we should be able to do the same in Gaza as well.
So right now, Jeremy, the only way a foreign journalist, in fact, any journalist, including an Israeli journalist, can get inside Gaza officially is to be embedded with the IDF, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And you've been in as an embedded journalist. Can you tell us what that experience was like and why the Foreign Press Corps, presumably you, feel that this is insufficient to report from Gaza?
Yeah, listen, I have been inside of Gaza about a half dozen times with the Israeli military. And there can be value in going in with them when it is our only way of getting in. But it is a pinhole view into what's happening. And anytime you embed with a military in a war zone, whether it is the Israeli military, the U.S. military, anyone else, you know that they are showing you what they want to show you, first of all, and you know that your access is going to be limited. In all of those times that I have been in Gaza with the Israeli military, I haven't been able to speak with Palestinians on the ground. And so just that shows you how limited it is. Now, there is value to it because we are able to see the destruction that has been wrought in Gaza every single time. And I can tell you that it is enormous and like nothing else that I have ever seen. But in addition to that, we are able to hear the Israeli military's perspective on what's happening. I've been inside Hamas's tunnels in the Gaza Strip, but none of that is or should be a substitute for free, unfettered, independent access to the Gaza Strip. And that's exactly what we're asking for.
And you reject Israel's argument or explanation that they're doing it to keep you safe, that they don't want to be held responsible for your safety while you're there independently.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, we go to dangerous war zones all around the world. That's our job as journalists, as war correspondents. We are perfectly capable of mitigating those risks ourselves, of assessing those risks ourselves. And it's also important to note that even as the Israeli government has made that argument, which again I don't buy, they have allowed doctors, they have allowed aid workers, they have allowed foreign dignitaries at time to go into Gaza, but they haven't allowed journalists. We would face the same safety risks as anybody else who goes into Gaza. And frankly, we're quite prepared to be able to handle and manage those security risks. And in addition to that, I mean, we have seen the toll that this war has had on Palestinian journalists in Gaza who have been killed and injured in numbers that we have not seen in any other modern war zone in the 21st century. And I believe that if we were there, if foreign journalists were there, American journalists, French journalists, and others, I think that would invite greater scrutiny of the safety of journalists in Gaza and of Israel's legal and moral duty to not target those journalists.
You spoke of the comparative case and that CNN and other foreign news organizations cover conflicts around the world. What do you say to the argument that, well, this is common practice not to allow journalists into war zones? How do you compare it to the situation? I mean, most recently, Ukraine, Syria, other conflict zones. Is this absolute inability to access Gaza by the foreign press an unusual situation?
It is an unusual situation because generally journalists are granted wider access to war zones. I can tell you that my colleagues who have been to Ukraine have been able to go to the front lines. Often that is embedded with the Ukrainian military, but not always. We have seen, in the beginning of that war, as journalists were positioned in many parts of eastern Ukraine where Russian forces began advancing. And it was because they were on the ground, able to report what they could see and hear, that the public at large was able to benefit from those reports. Gaza is also an unusual situation because Israel controls every single access point into Gaza. There are other war zones around the world where sometimes, you have to go around checkpoints. You have to go through different borders. You have to find other ways to get in. Gaza is unique in that it is completely sealed on every single side by sea, by air, and by land by the Israeli government.
Back to the fight, the fact that there is really a large-scale public campaign, part of it is you coming on my podcast, but there have been many foreign journalists appearing on Israeli media and international media, a statement by the Foreign Press Association here, really a big public battle to try to make it happen. Is this a sign that you just feel like you're giving up on the courts, that time after time after time, the Israeli courts sort of have let you down as a check on the government in order to push or force them to do that? Do you feel like a public appeal now is the only possible route of succeeding?
I see it as kind of all part of the same whole. We are trying every single possible avenue to be able to get into Gaza. We have tried through Israeli government officials. We are still trying through the Israeli Supreme Court. And we're also trying via public pressure. My hope ultimately is that, someone hears this interview on your podcast and someone says, someone inside the Israeli government says, we need to change our policy, or someone at the Supreme Court says we should, bring that hearing up. Really, I hope that the public pressure at least brings awareness to this issue. And that ultimately it will make people understand that this is a responsibility and something that's important, not just for journalists, not just for the international public, but also for the Israeli public. Israelis deserve to have a full and accurate and complete picture inside of Gaza of what is happening there, from sources that they trust, from news organizations that they recognize. And it's essential in a country that says it upholds democratic ideals in a country that touts itself as the only democracy in the Middle East. Journalism is core to any democracy. If you don't have information, if you don't have journalists who are able to independently report on what is happening, then you cannot sustain your democracy.
On a comparative scale, Jeremy, turning to your coverage of the West Bank, do you feel like your access there is limited too? Is this Gazan situation unique, or do you have trouble accessing the West Bank in order to cover IDF actions there and settler violence?
The West Bank is quite different. I've been to the West Bank numerous times. I mean, I've been in this role as Jerusalem correspondent since October 2023. I arrived here 2 days after October 7th, and since then, I've covered everything from the attack on the on Israel on October 7th, the situation in Gaza, the hostages, but also what is happening in the West Bank, including rising settler violence and the Israeli military's actions there. I've been able to access many different parts of the West Bank. Obviously, when the Israeli military is operating inside of a refugee camp in the West Bank, for example, we are often challenged in terms of getting in there, or frankly, sometimes we decide not to go in at that moment because of immediate potential dangers, because it can be an active combat area. What we have witnessed, however, is the intimidation factor from Israeli settlers in the West Bank. We've witnessed a rise in settler attacks, not just against Palestinians, I mean, primarily against Palestinians in the West Bank, but also against journalists who have gone to try and cover their stories.
I ask you about this, of course, not coincidentally, because about 2 weeks ago, you had a close encounter in the West Bank and captured it on camera in real time. We'll play a little bit of a clip of what happened there.
We have a group of settlers who are now following us in their vehicle. They've put their masks on as well, which is a concerning indication.
At an intersection, the settlers get out and try to pelt our vehicle. But we manage to approach a nearby Israeli border police vehicle, and the settlers turn around. But minutes after the border police head out to search for the settlers, we are ambushed.
Shoot. Everyone okay?
Yeah, shoot.
Go, drive.
Can you tell us about the story you were trying to cover and exactly what happened to you?
Yeah, we were on the ground in both Mazara Sharqiya and Sinjil to cover the brutal killing of an American citizen. His name was Saif Musallat. He was just 20 years old, and he was beaten to death by Israeli settlers. We showed up on the ground 2 days after he was killed to attend his funeral. I was able to interview his grieving father to learn a little bit more about Saif and also about his father's pursuit of justice and accountability. That afternoon, after going to the funeral, we tried to go to the site in Sinjil where Saif was beaten to death. And as we arrived on the scene, we first passed a border police vehicle. They checked our IDs. They let us through. And once we started driving around to try and get to the location where Saif was killed, we suddenly noticed that we were being followed by a white vehicle with settlers inside. And I saw the settlers with my own eyes. I saw them then put masks on as they were following us. And that was the first clear indication that something was going to happen. To make a long story short, after initially alerting the border police to the fact that these settlers were following us, the settlers then ambushed us unexpectedly. They started chasing after us. We were able to quickly get back into the car and speed off, but not before one of the settlers smashed the back rear window of our vehicle with some kind of a club. I can tell you that had we taken a few more seconds, that club would have smashed into somebody's head rather than into the vehicle itself. And it is a reminder of the daily violence that settlers are bringing to bear upon Palestinian civilians in these areas, and it's also a reminder of Israel's responsibility to ensure that journalists can safely do their jobs, including in areas in the West Bank where they have security control.
Yeah, we've done a lot of discussions on this podcast about the increased emboldenment of the violent settlers. You've been doing this now for a while, as you've said. Do you feel something's changed? Do you feel they're bolder, more aggressive, less afraid of authorities in terms of threatening journalists trying to cover the story, as well as increased aggression towards the Palestinians in the West Bank?
I mean, look, the numbers speak for themselves. You can track a clear rise in settler violence in the West Bank since October 7th. You can also track the statements from senior Israeli politicians, including, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, who have considerable influence either over the Israeli police or over security in the West Bank. And all of that is part and parcel of the picture that has allowed these settlers to expand their campaign of violence in the West Bank. And in many cases, we see that these outposts that are established by settlers are precursors to ultimate designs of annexation in the West Bank in the long term, but at least in the short term, to getting and securing Israeli recognition of some of those outposts. And we have seen the Israeli government, even just a few months ago, recognize several of these illegal outposts as full-fledged settlements, which under international law are still considered illegal, but which the Israeli government recognizes itself.
Jeremy, as you said, you came to Israel in 2023 after the war began, so you have no basis for comparison of covering pre-war Israel and post-war Israel. But even before the war, covering this beat, Israel and the Palestinians, for a major American news organization has a reputation among journalists for being really a tremendous challenge, because every single thing you report is questioned heavily on both sides. Many reporters coming from their work in the United States or even other countries are kind of shocked by that level. But I'm curious, I can't help asking you, so you came relatively prepared for this kind of pressure because you've covered the campaign of Donald Trump, the Trump White House. So I'm wondering, how does this hold up in terms of scrutiny of every single fact and figure that you present to your viewers?
That job didn't come with a flak jacket, but there were days where I wish it did. I did. I covered President Trump's rise as a politician. I covered his campaign from its inception. I was there when he came down that golden escalator at Trump Tower throughout his campaign, covered his entire first term at the White House. And there's no question that job prepared me for many of the slings and arrows that I faced here as Jerusalem correspondent. But more importantly, it prepared me to cover any story that I cover fairly, fearlessly, and always driven by a sense of accountability.
We're very addicted to Netanyahu-Trump comparisons on this podcast. Can you just tell us what covering the Trump White House versus covering the Netanyahu Prime Minister's office is like?
I think that the Israeli Prime Minister has certainly taken a few pages out of Donald Trump's playbook, whether it is his attacks on the press, whether it is the ways in which he tries to advance his narrative that sometimes doesn't stick to the facts, or whether it is in his approach to Donald Trump himself. I mean, that has been the most interesting thing for me to watch, is how well the Israeli Prime Minister has figured out how to manage his relationship with President Trump, although it hasn't always been smooth sailing. Prime Minister Netanyahu very much understands how to approach Trump, the extent to which flattery is often quite effective with President Trump. But ultimately, I'm interested to see where that relationship goes, because we have seen how President Trump, one of the things that just to take you on a little bit of a side detour here, I remember in covering the first Trump presidency, when there was a chemical weapons attack in Syria. And I was told at the time that President Trump had seen the images of children who were killed in that attack. And the pictures were quite gruesome. It showed children foaming at the mouth, clear results of a chemical weapons attack. And that prompted President Trump to take action and to carry out U.S. strikes in Syria, which at the time was quite a bold move. And I think that's a reminder for anyone who's watching how President Trump is handling this story in terms of Israel and Gaza, that President Trump can be moved by pictures. And I think we saw a little bit of that this week as President Trump said that the starvation in Gaza was undeniable, that no one is faking that. And I think it's also probably a reminder for Prime Minister Netanyahu that as much as he thinks that President Trump will stand by him no matter what, that the power of images and the power of the reality on the ground can sometimes move President Trump in unexpected ways.
Which kind of brings us full circle, right? In terms of them not wanting you to bring the world the images on the ground.
Yes, that is a very good point. I mean, I think it's quite clear at this stage that despite the arguments that the Israeli government has made, that ultimately, the only real motivation that kind of makes sense when you look at everything else is that this Israeli government doesn't want journalists on the ground in Gaza, doesn't want us to report what is happening there, doesn't want trusted foreign journalists to be able to broadcast those images live to the world. And you have to wonder why.
Jeremy, on the subject of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, last year you confronted him quite boldly on the humanitarian situation in Gaza at a press conference. Here's your question.
More than 40,000 Palestinians have now been killed in Gaza, a majority of whom are civilians. And these numbers are from the Palestinian Ministry of Health, but they are backed up by the United States, by international organizations. Humanitarian conditions in Gaza have degraded so much that diseases like polio and hepatitis A are now spreading. We have seen countless children be orphaned. We have seen countless mothers lose their children. How much is too much, sir? At what point is it time to end this war?
Netanyahu responded with a very long and extremely defensive monologue, accusing the international media, including you, Jeremy, of falling far short of reporting the truth about what is happening in Gaza.
Now report honestly, because you accused us of something that is outrageous. And in fact, the accusations against us are outrageously false. Humanitarian aid? 1 million trucks of aid, 1 million tons of aid? 700,000 tons of food, a deliberate starvation policy. You can say anything. Doesn't make it true. You repeat a lie over and over and over again. It assumes the cachet of self-evident truth, but it's false. Israel is doing, and the Israeli army is doing, something that no other army has done in history and will continue to do that. I'm not going to change my policies.
Jeremy, that was quite a little confrontation, and journalists don't usually get a right of response, but I want to ask you what you thought of Netanyahu's answer, and especially how what he said plays out to the world's ears 3 weeks later.
For me, it was interesting because I expected most of his answer. I expected, the kind of lengthy diatribe about all of the steps the Israeli military, he says, has taken to protect civilian casualties, his, insistence that we should report honestly and that we're lying about what Israel is doing in Gaza. All of that I expected. But what I didn't expect was what was quite a frank, candid admission by the Israeli prime minister at the end, when he said, I'm not going to change any of my policies, including combat policies, to minimize civilian casualties. And, I think anybody who listens to that with the context of all that has happened in Gaza, as so many people around the world are watching not only the level of destruction in Gaza, we're on the verge of hitting 60,000 deaths in the Gaza Strip, and that is probably an undercount given the number of people who are still buried under the rubble. When you see all of that and you put that whole picture together, it is quite startling to hear the Israeli prime minister, the man in charge of this Israeli war effort, say that he is not going to do anything to change any of his combat policies to minimize civilian casualties. And at the end of the day, that is the lens through which we should be viewing and covering this war. The Israeli prime minister has an enormous degree of control over what is happening in Gaza and what will continue to happen in Gaza. And his words, I think, resound quite clearly.
Do you think any of the news of this past week, where they're having humanitarian pauses in the fighting, announcing humanitarian corridors, do you think that perhaps something has shifted or changed between that press conference and today that is making Israel, that is making Netanyahu think twice about pursuing that policy so adamantly?
Fundamentally, no. I don't think it has changed anything for the Israeli prime minister. I mean, we have seen him bow to international pressure time and again. It's almost like he releases a little bit of it's like a pressure release valve to let a little bit of the steam out, to get, all of these Western, particularly European countries who come down on him hard, to kind of take their foot off the gas a little bit in terms of the pressure. But ultimately, we have seen that there is a straight line in Gaza, and that the Israeli prime minister has not taken his foot off the gas pedal in that sense. What we've witnessed this week with these tactical pauses, these safe corridors, is the Israeli prime minister bowing to that international outrage, including, it would seem, some pressure from the United States, if you listen to the words of President Trump. Ultimately, though, what it confirms more than anything else is that the Israeli prime minister could have taken these steps weeks or months ago. Even as he insisted, and other Israeli government officials have insisted, they didn't do anything to restrict the distribution of humanitarian aid in Gaza. The steps that Israel has taken this week are steps that humanitarian aid organizations have been calling for months, to create these safe corridors, to let the humanitarian aid trucks be able to move safely throughout Gaza without fear of Israeli bombing, away from civilian population centers until they actually get to their destination, etc. So Israel's steps this week actually confirm the restrictions that they denied they were imposing previously. But if you're asking me whether it is a sign that we are seeing a kind of broader shift in tactics or in strategy from the Israeli government, from the Israeli military in Gaza, I think my answer on that is a clear and emphatic no.
Jeremy, last question. How optimistic are you that you will be able to indeed report from the ground in Gaza in the near future?
I tend to be a glass half full person, and that's been difficult and challenging in covering the story. But I'm hopeful. I think that at the end of the day, there is such a clear imperative for so many different reasons, from a responsibility standpoint for governments, from a democracy standpoint, from a public interest standpoint, from a global interest standpoint. There are so many reasons why journalists should be allowed to do their jobs in Gaza. And at the end of the day, I can only hope and advocate for that position, and hope that either the Israeli government allows us into Gaza, or that the Israeli Supreme Court hears our case and ultimately reaches the determination that the Israeli government must let us in to do our jobs in Gaza.
Jeremy Diamond, CNN Jerusalem correspondent, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz podcast. Thanks to my guest, Jeremy Diamond, and to producer and editor, Nara Malkin. If you would like to continue to listen to our podcast and make sure that you never miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you are so inclined, leave us a 5-star rating there so more people can find us. And to keep up with all of the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.